Abraham Lincoln was our 16th president. His family moved to Indiana from Kentucky when he was 7, and he lived here until he was 21. Susanna, Chief Curator and Research Officer, will speak to Lincoln's impact on Indiana.
When Abraham Lincoln and his family moved to Indiana in 1816, the state was still wilderness. They had to cut down the trees, they had to find a way to build a house, and they were very much dependent on their neighbors. They really learned to value everyone. He also had very hard personal experiences. His mother died a couple of years after they came to the state, and I think that experience developed real deep empathy in him. In terms of his leadership, you might see this reflected in his cabinet when he becomes president. Not only did he put people who he knew well in his inner circle, but he reached out to people who he knew had great ability, who had also been his political rivals. The other thing that really came out of his youth in Indiana was his deep love of learning. He had almost no formal education, but he read everything he could, and he continued to learn, to teach himself, to seek out new experiences his entire life. And then also he learned his public speaking skills in Indiana. Public speaking was a real source of entertainment on the frontier, whether they were preachers, political debaters, all kinds of people who could speak well were highly valued. So he honed his speaking skills, and he was known for that throughout his political career. Without Indiana, Abraham Lincoln may never have become president. And this happened not only because Indiana citizens turned out to vote for him, but they also played a pivotal role in the political convention that nominated him. And he was not one of the favorites. But Indiana, along with Illinois, his home state, came out for him at the convention at the beginning and gave him enough votes to put him in the running and eventually for him to prevail at the convention. But it was considered bad form to actually look like you were running for the job. Other political figures, his friends, prominent people, journalists, they campaigned for him. And they were able to convince people of Indiana to vote for him because he really seemed like the best choice, a moderate on many of the issues at the time. And what were the key issues in the 1860 election? They were the expansion of slavery into the territories, which most people in Indiana were very much against, and they were economic policies that would benefit Westerners, things like expanding the railroads across the country, or creating the Homestead Act so that there would be land for people. Lincoln was very much for these, and he won solidly in that swing state of Indiana, and of course he won the presidency. Another relic of his time in Indiana was Lincoln's image as the rail splitter. What I'm holding is a campaign ribbon from 1860 that shows Lincoln as the rail splitter. In 1860, this was used as part of his presidential campaign to symbolize that this was a man of the people, that he understood their needs, that he was a hard worker, that he didn't put himself above other people, and that he would work for them. And this, in a growing country, was a very appealing image. Indiana was the first of the Western states to respond to Lincoln's call for mobilization. Not only did it send almost 15% of its population into battle, but it was also a major force for manufacturing, for agriculture, and as the crossroads of America for transportation. Indiana produced many of the goods, much of the food that was necessary to keep the war effort going. Many people also thought that Indiana citizens, many of whom were originally from the South, would naturally be more sympathetic to the South. But this was largely disproved, not only by the number of soldiers who served, but also by the response when Morgan's raiders came into southern Indiana and fought the only battle that was on Indiana soil. More than 65,000 people were mobilized to fight them, and that ended the question of whether Indiana was overly sympathetic to the South. Women also played a major role in the Civil War. They worked in armament factories. They served as nurses. They sewed. They created bandages. They raised money not only to help soldiers, but also widows and orphans who were left by the war. While we think of Lincoln primarily in terms of the Civil War, much important legislation passed. Land-grant colleges were created, and that gave us Purdue University. Lincoln fought for the 13th Amendment, which ended slavery in the United States, and saw it pass Congress. Lincoln didn't live to see the 14th and 15th Amendments passed, which came after his death in 1865, but they very much continued the ideals he was fighting for. The 14th Amendment said that blacks were full citizens of the United States and that their rights could not be abridged. The 15th Amendment would give black men the right to vote. These continue to be some of the most important amendments in United States history and were called the Second Bill of Rights. We're still struggling over a lot of the issues. We still argue over race, over immigration, over the role of government. But in all of these, we also look to Lincoln. We look at his ideals, we look at what he represents. Here in the state, we can also visit those physical places where he grew up. And so we are in a unique place to really think about his legacy and think about what his legacy says about the kind of state and the kind of country we would like to be.